Ted Bundy. He was charming, educated, and personable enough to pass as someone completely ordinary, which is precisely what made him so dangerous. Bundy operated across multiple states between 1974 and 1978, targeting young women and girls by exploiting the one thing most people extend instinctively to someone who appears harmless: trust. He posed as an authority figure, feigned injury, used crutches and arm slings to appear vulnerable, and manipulated kind-hearted strangers into lowering their guard at exactly the wrong moment. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already over. Law enforcement struggled for years to connect the cases because Bundy moved constantly and left little forensic evidence behind. He was eventually arrested in 1975, but escaped custody twice. The second time fleeing to Florida, where he killed 3 more people within weeks. His 1979 trial was the first murder trial in American history broadcast live on national television. And Bundy used the platform to represent himself, cross-examine witnesses, and perform composure he had no right to feel. He was convicted and sentenced to death. On January 24, 1989, he was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. He was 42 years old and had confessed to more than 30 murders in his final days, though investigators believe the true number was higher. John Wayne Gacy. Gacy spent years building a reputation as one of the most generous men in his Chicago community. He organized neighborhood events, hosted parties for local families, and volunteered as a performing clown named Pogo at children's hospitals and charity fundraisers. The contrast between that public image and what was happening inside his home on Summerdale Avenue is one of the most disturbing disconnects in the history of American crime. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy lured at least 33 young men and boys to his property under the pretense of offering work before restraining, torturing, and killing them. He buried the majority of his victims beneath his own house in a crawl space he had to keep expanding to accommodate the bodies. When the space ran out, he began disposing of victims in the Des Plaines River. He was caught in December 1978 after a 15-year-old boy went missing following a job interview at Gacy's home. Police entered the property and found human remains before they had finished searching the first room. He was convicted of 33 murders in 1980 and executed by lethal injection in 1994. His final words were just two words, and neither was an apology: Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer's crimes are difficult to write about in measured terms because there is almost no clinical language that adequately captures what he did. Between 1978 and 1991, he killed 17 young men, the majority of whom were men of color from Milwaukee's vulnerable communities. He lured them to his apartment with promises of money or company, drugged their drinks, and then subjected his victims to a level of violation that went far beyond killing. He preserved body parts, kept skulls on shelves, and consumed portions of his victims in an attempt to prevent them from ever truly leaving him. He drilled into the heads of at least 3 victims while they were still alive, injecting chemicals in a disturbed attempt to create permanent compliance. One of those victims escaped and ran to police covered in blood, but officers returned him to Dahmer's apartment after Dahmer convinced them the young man was his intoxicated partner. He was eventually caught in 1991 when another victim escaped and flagged down a patrol car. The contents of his apartment, when police entered, defied description. Dahmer was sentenced to 16 consecutive life terms in 1992 and was killed by a fellow inmate in November 1994, the Zodiac Killer. Most serial killers try to avoid attention. The Zodiac actively sought it, and that distinction made him one of the most unsettling figures in American criminal history. Operating in Northern California between 1968 and 1969, he targeted couples in isolated areas and claimed at least 5 confirmed murders, though his own letters to newspapers boasted of 37. Those letters, sent to the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and local police departments, contained encrypted ciphers he claimed would reveal his identity if solved. Law enforcement and amateur code breakers spent decades working through them. One cipher went unsolved for 51 years before a private team cracked it in 2020. It contained no identifying information. The Zodiac appeared to enjoy the investigation as much as the crimes themselves, mocking detectives, providing details only the killer could know, and taunting editors with the threat of more killings if they did not publish his messages on the front page. No one was ever charged. No confirmed identity was ever established. The case remains officially open. Somewhere between 1969 and the present, the Zodiac either died, stopped, or simply decided the game was over. Jack the Ripper. In the autumn of 1888, 5 women were murdered in the Whitechapel district of East London within a 10-week period, and the man responsible was never identified. What set Jack the Ripper apart from other killers of the era was not the body count, it was the precision. Each victim had her throat cut, and several showed evidence of surgical knowledge in the way internal organs had been removed cleanly and deliberately. At a time when detailed knowledge of human anatomy was uncommon among the general public, the nature of the wounds suggested someone with medical or butchery training. Scotland Yard investigated hundreds of suspects. Letters purportedly from the killer arrived at newspapers and police stations, one of which contained what appeared to be a human kidney preserved in wine. Whether those letters were genuine remains disputed. The murders stopped as abruptly as they had started, leaving behind no conviction, no confirmed suspect, and no resolution. Over 130 years later, the Ripper remains the most analyzed, unsolved case in criminal history, with more books written about him than almost any other figure in crime. Charles Manson. Manson never personally killed anyone, which made him in some ways more disturbing than those who did. He understood that the most effective way to project violence was to convince others to carry it out on his behalf, and he was extraordinarily good at it. In the late 1960s, Manson assembled a devoted commune of mostly young followers in California, filling a void of belonging and purpose that made his followers extraordinarily susceptible to his influence. He preached an apocalyptic race war he called Helter Skelter, convinced his followers it was coming, and told them the murders they were about to commit would help trigger it. On the night of August 9, 1969, members of the Manson family entered the home of actress Sharon Tate and killed 5 people. The following night, they killed 2 more. Manson was not present at either scene. He was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder in 1971 and spent the rest of his life in prison, denied parole 12 times. He died in November 2017 at the age of 83, having never shown a credible sign of remorse for what his words had caused. Andrei Chikatilo. Chikatilo spent 17 years moving through the Soviet Union undetected, and the system around him failed at almost every level to stop him. Between 1978 and 1990, he killed at least 52 people, predominantly children and young women, across the Rostov region of Russia. He targeted the vulnerable and the desperate, approaching victims at bus stations, train platforms, and public markets with offers of food or assistance before leading them to isolated areas. Soviet authorities made the situation significantly worse through a combination of incompetence and ideological stubbornness. The official position being that serial killers were a product of capitalist decay and therefore could not exist in a communist state. An innocent man was executed for one of Chikatilo's earlier murders. Chikatilo was actually brought in for questioning at one point and released after a clerical error. He was finally caught in 1990 after a routine identity check near the scene of a disappearance. During his trial, he was kept in an iron cage in the courtroom to protect him from the victims' families. He confessed to 56 murders. He was convicted of 52 and executed by a single gunshot in February 1994. Ed Gein. Ed Gein did not kill often by the standards of those on this list. What he did instead was something that disturbed investigators, criminologists, and the public so deeply that it permanently changed how people thought about what a killer could be. Gein lived alone on a remote farm in Plainfield, Wisconsin, following the death of his deeply controlling mother in 1945, a loss that left him entirely unmoored. Over the following decade, he began exhuming bodies from local cemeteries at night, taking them home and fashioning objects from the remains. When police searched his property in November 1957 following the disappearance of a local hardware store owner, they found a house that required no embellishment to become nightmare fuel. Furniture upholstered in human skin, bowls made from skulls, a vest constructed from a woman's torso, complete with breasts, which Gein would wear while performing rituals in the yard at night. He confessed to 2 murders, though investigators suspected the total was higher. He was declared legally insane and committed to a psychiatric institution where he lived quietly and politely until his death from cancer in 1984. The house was burned to the ground by locals before he was ever released. His crimes directly inspired Psycho, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. If you made it this far, drop a comment below and let us know which killer you want us to cover next. Subscribe so you never miss an upload. There's a lot more where this came from.